You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
Tomorrow, October 29th, will commemorate 8 years since the passing of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw. He was agent to the stars, some you may have even heard of. Names like Marilyn Monroe, Donna Summer, Bill Cosby, Mark Spitz, Warren Beatty, Berry Gordy, Kim Novak, Clint Eastwood, and many more. He eventually became president, CEO, and then chairman of the William Morris Agency. You can imagine he was a walking Google search engine and knows just about all there was of the history of Hollywood. To that end, his son and New York Times bestselling author Joel Brokaw has penned Driving Marilyn, the life and times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw. In fact, tomorrow, Tuesday, Book Soup in West Hollywood will be hosting a book launch party. And it's my honor and privilege to welcome Joel Brokaw to our studio right now. Joel, good evening. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Anyone in the business knows the name Norman Brokaw, but I know that you knew him as Dad more than anything.
Correct.
Who was Dad?
Well, Dad was kind of an enigma to mostly all of his children because he had a very separate work life and home life. And he was totally excited to go to work every morning. But home life was a challenge for him. He had 3 marriages. Thankfully, the last marriage was very happy. But I was a product of the first marriage, and he was miserable when he wasn't working. But one of the things I found out in the book is that he was just so happy with his job. He loved being an agent. He loved the relationships with his clients. And I think he had a lot of trauma from his upbringing in the family. He had a very happy beginning of his childhood, but there were a lot of tragedies that happened, a lot of deaths. And so he became kind of emotionally unavailable to my brothers and I. And it was, the 1950s Dad was kind of like, bring home the bacon, see you tonight type of thing. He wouldn't be changing diapers or anything like that.
Tell me about his upbringing. It was full of trauma and tragedy.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a riches to rags story. His mother's family came over from Russia, and they were Russian acrobatic dancers, and they performed on vaudeville and were a really hit attraction. And so he came from a show business background. His mother, the group disbanded, and she ended up marrying a lawyer who became very successful and was owning a lot of real estate in New York. And then the stock market crash happened. But my father was born because they had a child who had been killed by a nanny who accidentally killed her. And so my father was the replacement. So there was like that kind of energy that was around him, whereas he's very precious, but we're very afraid of that happening again. And so he raised us kind of the same way. And he lost his father when he was 13. His oldest brother, who he was in love with, died in the Death March of Bataan, and his mother had a heart attack. And then he suddenly, at age 16, was the sole support of her mother, who had lost all of her money.
We know of a lot of people over the many years and decades who would have given their left arm to get into Hollywood, just to hang around Hollywood, but somehow he found his way in the door. How did he get in?
Nepotism.
So everything old is new again, huh?
Right. So his uncle was Johnny Hyde, and Johnny Hyde was a very famous agent. He represented Marilyn Monroe. He discovered Marilyn Monroe, but he had all of the major stars from the early times of movies and in vaudeville, the Marx Brothers, on and on and on. And so Johnny Hyde felt badly for my father and decided, like, I'll hire him even though every other nephew is going to want this job, but felt sad for his sister who had been through so much trauma. And so my father had this incredible opportunity at age 16, and he just said, I want to make the best of this. And he never forgot that opportunity that he was given, because for many, many years afterwards, he would continuously reach down and help other people. He loved talented people, not only the stars, but he loved the talented people he would meet on the street. He loved the talented trainees in the mailroom. He took an interest, and he was there, but it was like a kind of a payback for him. So
when did your father realize that he had something that he could build, that he could grow, that he could turn into something?
Well, I think he had a genius from a very early age. Like he had convinced his school principal that it was a fictitious Jewish holiday and all the kids got off school that day. So he was a wheeler dealer from really early on. But the thing was, he had mentors who realized that he had something really special. And to give you an example, he was a motion picture agent, and his boss came to him and said, I want to talk to you about something important, something that's going to be called very important, and it's called television. We think it's going to be called television. We want you to start the West Coast department. And my father asked him, how do you want me to proceed? He said, I'll leave that up to you. But they had such faith in his creativity. And he came up with a brilliant idea that basically set the table for dramatic and comedy series on television, because at that point it was a novelty. It was a little tiny box that you couldn't even sit on your sofa. You had to.
It's a piece of furniture.
Yeah, and so basically, he of many other people who made contributions, made a major contribution to establishing television, not being a novelty, but being a mainstay in the American household.
Being Joel Brokaw, the son of Norman Brokaw, and you understood what your father did growing up, I'm quite sure it was a cavalcade of stars who might have come to the house, through the house, and what have you.
Absolutely. I've always realized that my father was someone special, and that the world that he inhabited was really special. But you know what? It really didn't have that much attraction to me for one big reason, and that was I saw so many miserable people. And especially with talented people and stars, they're always worried. They're so insecure. And my father was not just an agent. George Slaughter, the man who started Laugh-In, described my father as being, he was an agent, a manager, an accountant, a lawyer, and a psychiatrist. So my father was always having to pump these people up, tell them how terrific they were, what a great job they did on a movie or on a television show, late at night, on the weekends. He was constantly having that job. And it's because, and so there's like kind of a grasping energy, like, is the telephone going to ring again? And my father was the gatekeeper. And so they directed all that energy. And I'm like 3 or 4 years old, and I'm feeling that energy, and I'm saying, I don't really think I want to be part of this.
But he was driving for people at one point in his career, early career, driving for people like Marilyn Monroe, taking her wherever she needed to go. And I'm quite sure he got to see all the non-glamorous and glitzy side of these people.
Well, you know, he was such a positive, enthusiastic person and he was also a major keeper of secrets.
Yes.
So if you ever asked him, like, what was that person really like? He would change the subject very quickly. And that made writing this book, as you can understand, very difficult because I had to do quite a lot of forensic work. I had the opportunity to speak with him and interview him on a number of subjects, but it was too late. He had dementia and his memory was shot, and I realized that there wasn't any more to get from him. So I had to then go and dig up all the old clients and
get the contemporaries.
That's right. And there's so few of them. Most of them were in their 80s and 90s. And in fact, since the time I've written this book, 2 of the people I interviewed have passed away.
That's part of the reason why it's so important we tell you about Driving Marilyn, the life and times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw. We'll have more with his son, Joel Brokaw, in just a moment, and also tell you more about the launch party, which is going to be tomorrow at Book Soup in West Hollywood. It's Later with Mo Kelly, KFI AM 640 live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
My guest in studio is Joel Brokaw, and he has a new book. He's New York Times bestselling author. His new book is titled Driving Marilyn, the life and times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw, who was his father. And Joel, let me come back to you. I was watching Game 3 of the World Series in the studio tonight. Dodgers, Yankees. I know your father, being from New York, I'm guessing probably a Yankees fan.
He was both a Yankees fan and a Giants fan.
How did that figure into his life and upbringing?
Well, being having European parents, it was important for him to learn a musical instrument. And so his mother would take him to a nearby apartment building. And my father would purposely have her time it for when the ball games at Yankee Stadium would be over. And one of the neighbors for the piano teacher was a ball player. And my father brought his baseball glove and ball to his piano lesson so he could play catch with Lou Gehrig.
Wait, the Lou Gehrig?
Correct.
And you say it so matter-of-factly.
And I had to wait until I was almost 60 years old to hear that story from my father. I would have told my kids that story like as soon as they could master the English language, and I had to wait all that time to hear that from him.
Was he a keeper of not only Hollywood's secrets, but also his secrets?
Yeah, I think, again, the trauma that he went through, he just wasn't very forthcoming. He wasn't a very playful dad. He was a great dad. He was a loving dad, protective. If you got into any kind of trouble, he would bail you out so quickly. And he did the same thing for his clients whenever they got into trouble. So he was great in a crisis, but he wasn't touchy-feely. You know, he wouldn't get on the floor and play with you.
I gave a short list at the beginning of our conversation how he was agent to people like Marilyn Monroe, Donna Summer, Bill Cosby, Mark Spitz, Warren Beatty, Berry Gordy, Kim Novak, Clint Eastwood. Who am I leaving out which sticks out in your mind?
Well, there's also Tony Orlando was a very close friend of his, and it all kind of runs together with me as well. Natalie Wood was a huge client, and Kim Novak, and Loretta Young, and Berry Gordy, and Danny Thomas.
Were you given the opportunity to form any of your own relationships with these individuals?
You know, children were kind of seen but not heard. But I do remember the ones who were nice to me and who kind of gave me the time of day. And that was Natalie Wood. She took my brothers and I to the circus. And in fact, I spoke with Robert Wagner for this book, and I told him what an incredible moment that was for me when they took me to the circus, and how she just enjoyed watching us looking at the circus. It was like almost a spiritual moment. Loretta Young was also fantastic, and I had the opportunity later on to work with her, and she was a fantastic person, just so much fun, and you could just learn so much from being around her. And my father, I think, was exposed to her at a very early age, and he learned about how to empower his female clients from the example that Loretta did. So Natalie Wood benefited from that. And Donna Summer especially benefited from my father's mentoring to say, you can step up and be the chairman of the board.
At William Morris Agency?
No, to be the chairman of the board of your career.
Oh, okay.
And Donna Summer is a good example of it. She was feeling really thwarted, that she was being overridden in some of her big decisions in her career, and she felt double-crossed and so forth. And my father actually flew on a red eye. Called him upset, and he flew in on a red eye and knocked on her apartment door in New York and handed her a little prism, like one of these little desk...
like a paperweight?
Yeah, paperweight, and it said chairman of the board on it. And she, to her dying day, was so grateful to my father because she realized that she could take charge of herself, not only in her personal life, but also in her career and as a parent. That little tiny moment really changed things. And my father was doing that constantly for people. Those are the brilliant things he was able to. His genius was in simplicity.
You mentioned that your father's memory was failing. He was suffering from dementia in his later years. And you also mentioned that you spoke to Robert Wagner and others in the creation of this book to get their firsthand accounts. Who else did you speak to?
Well, I exchanged a number of emails with Kim Novak, and she was just delightful. I also had a lengthy interview with Mark Spitz, the Olympic swimmer, and that was one of the more insightful interviews that I did. I also talked to Tony Orlando, and Tony Orlando had a great story about how Norman got him a job on a Broadway play called Barnum, where Tony would have to learn how to walk on a tightrope. And my father's genius idea was that Tony had just gotten out of rehab and out of a mental hospital. And he said to him, if you walk across that stage in a tightrope, people will know that you're clean. And it changed his life.
Also, he was the representative for Bill Cosby.
Correct.
Who was Bill Cosby to your father?
Well, my father pretty much put him on the map. He got him I Spy, and it was a very, very long relationship, well over a half century. But it was like one of these relationships of mutual respect. It was very formal, I mean, in its own way. But my father was in charge of really making the big deals. He put together the Cosby Show. Whereas there were other people in the agency who handled a lot of the day-to-day. And I think that what's important for me personally is that I felt that my father's legacy that you could see in the obituaries was that they said, how did he not know what Bill Cosby was doing? And I put in the book a very forceful argument that he could not have known about it because of the professional boundaries that they had and the sort of the protective bubbles that existed in their relationship. But, Cosby was, the revenues in the 80s kept the business going. When there was a downturn at William Morris, it was and the big tragedy with Bill Cosby is that he did so much good, and it's all been wiped away.
Let me jump in there because we're getting ready to go to break, but I'm curious to know, your father lived long enough to see the fullness of everything which happened with Bill Cosby.
Well, not exactly. And it was that his dementia, his cognitive abilities, by the time Hannibal Burgess came out with his accusation, my father was oblivious to it. He knew about the paternity suits and things like that. Basically, those kind of things in the age of before Me Too were, it happens. And if we have a morality clause for all of our clients, we won't have any clients. But the major transgressions that he was accused of, my father did not know about. And I really investigated that very carefully.
Absolutely fascinating. Probably reason enough for you to make sure that you are at the book launch party tomorrow at Book Soup in West Hollywood. It starts at 7 p.m. I'm speaking with Joel Brokaw as he's getting ready to release his highly anticipated book, Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw. We have one more segment with Joel Brokaw. Look, I'm enjoying this conversation. When we come back, what is it you want people to know most?
I think I want them to know about the values that he represented it, which there's so many people that say he's the last of a dying breed. They don't make him like him anymore. And I beg to disagree.
All right, let's talk about that next. KFI AM 640 live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
Well, it's Later with Mo Kelly on KFI AM 640.
Live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app. My guest in studio right now is Joel Brokaw. We're talking about his new book, Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw. There will be a book launch party tomorrow at Book Soup in West Hollywood at 7 p.m. You definitely do not want to miss that. Joel, let me come back to you. We were having a wonderful conversation off air that we can't even put on air. But very quickly, before we get into your late father's values and why he did what he did, tell me about some of the things that would probably blow people's minds as far as a normal day of work for him.
Right. Well, he had to go on a trip to Europe on a bounty hunting mission because Kim Novak was under contract to Columbia, and she just finished a film, and she was due to start another movie, but she had fallen in love with an Italian fake count, like a fake royalty person. And so...
Oh, catfishing, but old school. Okay.
Right. And so my father had the job to gently go over there and get her to come back. And he aced it. And you can read about it in the book how he did it. So, that's one story. Then, the classic Norman Brokaw story is that he's driving Marilyn Monroe in around 1952 to an audition for a television show, a talent show that all the casting agents would watch. They go to the Brown Derby on Vine Street after, which was the place to be seen, and they were definitely seen. Bill Frawley, who played Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy, walks over the table, and my father says, "This is a young lady we believe in named Marilyn Monroe, blah, blah, blah." And then Fred Mertz says, "My friend, I'm having dinner with Joe D. He would love to meet the young woman."
Wait a minute. Your father was there when Joe DiMaggio, Yankees tie-in, met Marilyn Monroe?
Correct. That's right. And so he says, so Bill Frawley says to my father, "We'll stop by when we're finished." And so he goes back to his table. My father turns to Marilyn and says, "I want to tell you that Joe DiMaggio is going to call me and ask for your phone number." And what she said to him is, "Who's Joe D?" She had no idea who he was. And so he had to give her a brief explanation about baseball and baseball stars. And we all know what happened.
Right.
And, but that's where it started. And,
I know you probably have some sort of cool Elvis story to tell.
Well, one thing that I didn't know about and didn't find out about until I was writing the book was that Colonel Parker was the man who ran Elvis's career. And Colonel Parker loved something about my father. He saw something in himself, which is, I can't really even articulate what it was, but he felt the bond with him. And so Colonel Parker said, any offers coming into William Morris have to go through Norman. So my father was a gatekeeper on Elvis.
So any public appearance, any performance, any appearance in a movie.
Correct.
That was your father had to give the okay.
Correct.
Beach blanket bingo.
Anything. So it had to go through his office. And I never realized that because my father would never talk about it. He had a stack of Elvis records by his phonograph that he never played. And he took me to see him perform twice in Las Vegas, but it wasn't a hangout thing. You didn't hang out with Elvis if you were an agent.
Did you ever feel the enormity or the magnitude of your father's importance to the business while you were a child?
Most definitely. I think we would go into his office. He would take us on Saturday mornings because he loved being in the office rather than being at home. So he would take us, my brothers and me, and we just felt the power. We just felt like we walked into that office building and it was like the epicenter, like the Earth's axis of the entertainment world ran through that building. And so in a way, it's like in telling his story, we're also kind of telling the story of the entertainment industry in a really interesting period. We look at now how there's so much turmoil and transformation in the business. There's always been turmoil and transformation. New media comes forward and everybody gets nervous. But my father thrived on all that. He saw opportunities where other people saw limitations.
Tell me about his ethos, his way of doing business and also doing life and how it came together.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, he wore many hats. He wasn't just a flesh peddler wanting his 10%. He got involved. If a client was having a problem and came to him, especially even medical problems. He knew every doctor in town. And I can't tell you the number of times that people would come up to me and say, I'm so thankful to your father. He saved my mother's life. Got in with the right doctor. And so he could have been like a medical advocate. He could have been successful in that industry. But basically, he did not set boundaries for what he could do. And he felt that, whatever he could contribute to them, he would do. And he did it selflessly. He didn't expect anything in return, because it's a fickle business. There are people leaving and running off with other agents all the time. But he just felt that he was there to serve, and it wasn't about him. The relationships were first, and it wasn't about what's in it for me. And that's what people loved about him, because it was real and he had integrity.
Joel, can I get you to stick around for one more segment? Because I want to talk about your book signing and book launch party tomorrow at Book Soup. And I think that would be great for everyone to, I'll say, collectively end this conversation on.
Okay. Thank you.
It's Later with Mo Kelly. My guest in studio is Joel Brokaw. We're talking about his new book, Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw. We'll close out in just a moment. KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
I'm closing out my conversation with Joel Brokaw, New York Times bestselling author. His new book is Driving Marilyn, The Times and Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw. And Joel, thank you so much for this conversation. We're going to talk about your book signing, which is tomorrow in just a moment, but I have one question. The presidential election is next week, as we all know. And no, I don't have a political question, but it's appropriate that you tell the story of how your father talked his way into a trip to the Oval Office to meet then President Gerald Ford and his chief of staff, a young Dick Cheney.
Well, my father was an expert at working the room. And in this case, it was working the beach in Hawaii.
Oh,
and
hard work.
He was on the beach chair next to Nelson Rockefeller and Happy Rockefeller, who was vice president at the time. And they were talking about Ford, and my father realized that, there's something really special, really low-key, like Harry Truman-esque about Gerald Ford, and he thought it might be something I could do for him. And it's a very convoluted but very entertaining story about how they let this agent into the Oval Office and how, oh, Mr. President, you can't sign a contract while you're still president. And he says, no, tell Norman Brokaw that send him the telegram that he's representing me. And so the kicker is that Gerald Ford, when he left the White House, had $300,000 to his name. He did not come from wealth. A year later, with all the deals that my father put together with him, he had $12 million.
In 1970s money.
Correct. And so he just had a vision of it. And he did the same thing for Mark Spitz after the Munich Olympics. He saw this young man and saw something that no other agent would touch, an athlete or a politician. But he saw opportunities, again, where other people saw limitations. And Mark Spitz, when I interviewed him, was crying on the phone because he said, your dad was just so incredible. And he did such an incredible job for me, and I miss him so much. And that's part of what's going to be happening at the book signing. It's going to be kind of like a bonus memorial service for my father, because so many people are coming who miss him and want to partake in it and want to sample, because they say that the values that he represented are really in short supply. And I'm hoping that the book will kind of help to reignite in people the fact that maybe what's in it for me is a very limited aspiration.
The book signing is tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Book Soup, which is 8818 Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood. And I wonder, when you started out thinking of putting this book together, you probably had an idea of what it was going to be, an idea of what you thought you were going to learn about your father. On the other side now, were you surprised in any way?
Absolutely, because I think some of the things that I was maybe critical about my father, I really learned to accept. I didn't write this book with an axe to grind, but I sort of said, he really didn't live his life fully. He didn't have any friends outside of the business. He didn't have any great hobbies. And then I realized from talking to people that he didn't need anything else. He was so complete. He was so joyful in what he did. He didn't need anything else. And that was a revelation for me.
What have your siblings said?
They just love it. They are just delighted. It's brought our family even closer together because we all miss him as well.
Who all would you expect tomorrow night? Friends, family, who else might be in attendance?
Yeah, I know all of our family is going to be there.
All right, good.
And his assistant for more than 30 years is making her way there as well, who's featured prominently in the book. And outside of that, I don't really know. Mm-hmm. But I know that they're getting a lot of response to it. And we're looking for it's going to be a lively crowd, I'm sure.
Do you find that, do you expect that you might be emotional at times?
I'm emotional right now. So, I'm sure I will. Just seeing all the people there who have also been blessed by being touched by him. So I'm sure the vibe in the room is going to be pretty heavy that way.
This is an impossible question, but I think you are best suited and most qualified to answer it. If your father were here today and took a look at the landscape of Hollywood as we know it, from the role of an agent to the evolution of TV, movies, and streaming, what might he have said?
Well, he was always a believer that the business has to constantly evolve. So he embraced change. And I think that he would still find opportunities. He would still, and again, putting the relationships first. When you have a great relationship with someone, you get together and the creative sparks fly. So I think he would have been perfectly fine with it and might have been able to create something new out of the mess that is happening.
Now, you said at the beginning of our conversation that he was a protector of secrets and he didn't tell other people's business, but did you ever glean or could you ever sense that there was one person that he may have favored more than others or one that he thought was more difficult than the others?
I have a chapter about Joey Bishop in the book, who was a big star in the 60s and 70s, a comedian. But he wasn't a very nice person.
You're being very kind, it sounds like.
and Mary, his assistant, I said, I can't really get anybody to talk to me on the record about Joey Bishop. I said, did you ever talk to him about it? And I said, I asked him one day, what was Joey Bishop like? And all he said was, he was not a very nice person. Mm-hmm. So, he felt like being an agent is being someone who's trustworthy. And so if I'm representing you and I get pissed off and I say bad things about you, well, somebody else is going to hear that and say, I don't want that agent working for me because did you see what he did to Mo? Mm-hmm. So that's why he was a keeper of secrets.
I have one more question, and you may know the answer to this one. Did he like television as a consumer? Did he have a favorite television show?
That's a hard question for me to answer because I didn't live with him and I didn't see him all that often because we lived in different parts of the state and all of that. So I know that there was, towards the end of his life, he just loved watching Dodger games and he would get a chuckle out of some of the more ridiculous reality shows that are out there.
Well, there you have it, a fitting conclusion to our conversation. We've been talking about Driving Marilyn, the life and times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw. His author is New York Times bestseller-selling author Joel Brokaw, his son, and the book signing and book launch event is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at Book Soup, which is 8818 Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood. And you can get all this information and more. We recommend that you go to joelbrokaw.com.
Correct.
Joel Brokaw, we have met casually over the years through mutual friends and professional acquaintances, but we've never had an extended dialogue. And I'm so pleased that we've been able to do this, and hopefully we get to do it again. So you need to write some more books.
I would love to. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this so much.
KFI AM 640, we are live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
Whether you love us, hate us, or haven't made up your mind, we're glad you're here.
KFI.
And KOST HD2.
Los Angeles, Orange County.
Live everywhere on the iHeartRadio.